Simple question. What is it that you worship? What is it that you worship? What do you raise your hands to? We heard in the second reading, lifting up holy hands. In every place the men should pray, lifting up holy hands. I often marvel at watching young children, particularly when you're at someone's home, or perhaps even a gathering here, and a young child will see their father or their mother, who they've not seen for a little while, maybe even the entire day. And what is it that a young child will often do when they see their parent whom they've missed? Maybe they haven't seen their parent through the whole day. They will run as best as they can to them and do what? Lift up their hands, huh? Because they want to be picked up. They want to be held. They want to be hugged. They want to have a moment of closeness with their parent. I think that's the image we need to have in our mind and in our heart as we look at the second reading today. In every place we should pray, lifting up holy hands without anger or argument. Beautiful way to pray. I am sure you will recall the book, Crossing the Threshold of Hope. I've quoted it from time to time. It is a book ultimately authored by Pope, now Saint John Paul II. He had promised to give an interview and was unable to honor that promise, and so he asked the reporters to give the questions they were going to ask, and he wrote his answers. And the second question posed in the book, probably the most famous question quoted from that book: how does and for whom does the Pope pray? How does and for whom does the Pope pray? And John Paul II goes on to begin his answer. In order to ask how and for whom the Pope prays, you must most appropriately ask the Holy Spirit. Because when the Pope prays, he simply places himself in the presence of the Holy Spirit, and he allows the Holy Spirit to guide and direct his prayer. When you ask how or for whom the Pope prays, you must most appropriately ask the Holy Spirit. Because when the Pope prays, he places himself in the presence of the Spirit, and he allows the Holy Spirit to guide and direct his prayer. Beautiful way to pray, summed up in a simple statement. When you pray, do you give God instructions or do you report for duty? That's a simple statement. And I know myself, and I have certainly observed many in our own adoration chapel come to pray that way. I've noticed some come with a wheelbarrow full of books and, spiritual resources as well. But I've seen some come with nothing other than themselves. And they sit or kneel. And at times in our own adoration chapel, I have witnessed people laying prostrate on the floor, as did John Paul II when he prayed often, lay before the Blessed Sacrament in prayer. And I've seen some in our own adoration chapel stand with their hands high in the air before the Blessed Sacrament, looking for the Lord to truly lift them up. How is it that you pray? Do you give the Lord instructions? I'm going to guess we all do. I know I do at times too. But hopefully also do we simply report for duty, to be in his eternal presence and allow him to guide and direct where we must go. No doubt I have told you the story 1,000 times of my dear communion call from many years ago in Niagara Falls, Josephine Panatoni. She was a wonderful woman, stricken down in death in the very prime of her young life at the age of 95. And in the early 80s, that was no small accomplishment. And I remember visiting with Josephine in her house. She lived a few doors from the church. We would take communion to her every day. And I remember her telling me the story of her life. And I remember her telling me that when she was a little girl and she went to Catholic school, they began every day at Mass. I remember that too. Mass was roll call. We all had our spot in the bench, you know. She said when she went on to high school, the same was true. She went to Mass every day. She said after high school she began to work, and she said she would still go to Mass every morning on her way to work and stop into church on the way home. Churches were all open in those days. She would stop to pray. And she said, eventually I got married, and I believe she had 5 or 6 children. And eventually her parents moved in because they became elderly and ill, and eventually her in-laws moved in, who also became elderly and ill. And she said, I was lucky if I could find a minute to make the sign of the cross and pray an Our Father. She said, but I always did. And then she said, now I'm old. She said, I pray the rosary 15 times a day. And she meant it. Her rosary had welts on it. I saw them. She had a stack of index cards with everyone she promised to pray. And I know she used them every day because they were disintegrating from use. And she said, in addition to praying the rosary 15 times a day, I hope God will forgive me because I do watch wrestling on pay-per-view. I thought and told her I thought the Lord would cut her a break on that. Josephine taught a beautiful story. The different moments of our life, we probably have more time or less to afford in prayer. But no matter how busy or how much time we may find we have on our hands, always find some time each and every day to pray. How is it that you pray? And do you find that time each and every day to pray? And that question is certainly answered by St. Paul to Timothy today. In the very beginning we hear, first of all, I ask that supplications, prayers, petitions, and thanksgivings be offered for everyone. For kings, for all in authority, that we may lead a quiet and tranquil life. I don't know about you, but I know in my life, both in hearing and in speaking, I have heard and spoken words other than praise and thanksgiving for those who may be in positions of authority. They be our elected officials or leaders within our church. And it is that very moment that I try to call myself to task on these very words, that if I am able to hear or speak words of criticism for those who are in positions of authority and leadership, I should spend twice as much time that day in prayer for their ability to lead. If you are like I am from time to time, we can all say things critical. They be leaders that we've elected or within our own church. Our own bishop is criticized on a daily basis. I am sure I am criticized on a daily basis. And I am sure many leaders within our church, ordained religious and lay, criticized. If that in any way, shape, or form describes what you have heard or what you have said, think critically this week and try to take some time to pray twice as much for those individuals that perhaps you have heard or spoken words of criticism. Could you begin to imagine the world we would live within if we all prayed for those in authority each and every day? Who is it that you pray for, and how is it that you pray? A good question to ponder this day.